Our lives are shaped as profoundly by personality as by gender or race, and the single most important aspect of personality, the north and south of temperament, is where we all fall on the introvert-extrovert spectrum. Yet, today we make room for a remarkably narrow range of personality styles. We're told that to be great is to be bold, to be happy is to be sociable. We see ourselves as a nation of extroverts, which means that we lost sight of who we really are. Depending on which study you consult, 1/3 to 1/2 of Americans are introverts. In other words, 1 out of every 2-3 people you know. If you're not an introvert yourself, you're surely raising, managing, married to, or coupled with one. If these statistics surprise you, it's probably because so many people pretend to be extroverts. Closet introverts pass undetected on playgrounds, in high school locker rooms, and in the corridors of corporate America. You only have to raise the subject of this book with your friends and people you know to find that the most unlikely people consider themselves introverts. It makes sense that so many introverts hide even from themselves. We live with the value system that I call the extrovert ideal. The universal belief that the ideal self is outgoing, alpha, and comfortable in the spotlight. The typical extrovert prefers action to contemplation, risk-taking to heat-taking, certainty to doubt. He favors quick decisions, even at the risk of being wrong. She works well in teams and socializes in groups. Introversion, along with its cousin sensitivity, seriousness, and shyness, is now a second-class personality trait, somewhere between a disappointment and a disease. Introverts living under the extrovert ideal are like women in a man's world, discounted because of a trait that goes to the core of who they are. Extroversion is an enormously appealing personality style, but we have turned it into an oppressive standard, to which most of us feel we must conform. If you're an introvert, you also know that the bias against quiet can cause deep psychic pain. As a child, you might have overheard your parents apologize for your shyness, or at school you might have been prodded to come out of your shell, that noxious expression which fails to appreciate that some animals naturally carry shelter everywhere they go, and that some humans are just the same. A member of an email list called Introvert Retreat writes, "All the comments from childhood still rings in my ears, that I was lazy, stupid, slow, and boring. By the time I was old enough to figure out that I was simply introverted, it was a part of my being, the assumption that there was something inherently wrong with me. I wish I could find that little trace of doubt and remove it." You might also been told that you're in your head too much, a phrase that's often deployed against the quiet and cerebral. Of course, there's another word for such people: thinkers. There is no all-purpose definition of introversion or extroversion. These are no unitary categories like curly-haired or 16-year-old. Still, today's psychologists tend to agree on several important points. For example, that introverts and extroverts differ in the level of outside stimulation that they need to function well. Many psychologists would also agree that introverts and extroverts work differently. Extroverts tend to tackle assignments quickly. They make fast, sometimes rash, decisions and are comfortable with multitasking and risk-taking. They enjoy the thrill of the chase for rewards like money and status. Introverts often work more slowly and deliberately. They like to focus on one task at a time and are good at concentrating. Our personalities also shape our social styles. Extroverts are the people who will add life to your dinner party and laugh generously at your jokes. They tend to be self-confident, dominant, and in great need of company. Extroverts think out loud and on their feet. They prefer talking to listening, rarely find themselves at a loss for words, and occasionally blur out things they never meant to say. Extroverts need to recharge when they don't socialize enough. Introverts, in contrast, may have strong social skills and enjoy parties and business meetings, but after a while, wish they were home alone. They prefer to devote their social energies to close friends, colleagues, and family. They listen more than they talk, think before they speak, and often feel as if they express themselves better in writing than in conversation. They tend to dislike conflict. Many have a horror for small talk but enjoy deep discussions. Introverts recharge their batteries by being alone. Nor are introverts necessarily shy. Shyness is the fear of social disapproval or humiliation, while introversion is a preference for environments that are not overstimulating. Shyness is inherently painful. Introversion is not. One reason that people confuse the two concepts is that they sometimes overlap. Many shy people turn inward partly as a protection from the socializing that causes them such anxiety, and many introverts are shy, partly as a result of receiving the message that there's something wrong with their preference for reflection, and partly because their psychologies, as we will see, compel them to withdraw from high stimulation environments. But for all their differences, shyness and introversion have in common something profound. The mental state of a shy extrovert, sitting quietly in a business meeting, may be very different from a calm introvert. The shy person is afraid to speak up, while the introvert is simply overstimulated. But to the outside world, the two appear the same. This gives us an insight into how our focus on alpha status blinds us to things that are good, smart, and wise. No matter if you're an introvert or extrovert, doesn't mean that your behavior is predictable across all circumstances. We can't say that every introvert is a bookworm or every extrovert wears lampshades at parties, any more than we can say that every woman loves cooking and every man loves contact sports. As Jung put it, there's no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. Such a man would be in a lunatic asylum. This is partly because we are all gloriously complex individuals, but also because there are so many different kinds of introverts and extroverts. Introversion and extroversion interact with our other personality traits and personal histories, producing widely different kinds of people. In the culture of character, the ideal self was serious, disciplined, and honorable. What counted was not so much the impression you made in public as you behaved in private. The word personality didn't exist in the English until the 18th century, and the idea of having a good personality was not widespread until the 20th. But when we embraced the culture of personality, we started to focus on how others perceived us. We became captivated by people who were bold and entertaining. The rise of industrial America was a major force behind this cultural evolution. The nation quickly developed from an agricultural society of little houses on the prairie to an urbanized the business of America's business powerhouse. In the country's early days, most Americans lived on farms or in small towns, interacting with people they would known since childhood. But when the 20th century arrived, a perfect storm of big businesses, urbanization, and mass immigration blew the population into cities. In 1790, only 3% of Americans lived in cities. In 1840, only 8% did. By 1920, more than 30% of Americans lived in cities. Americans found themselves working no longer with neighbors, but with strangers. Citizens morphed into employees, facing the question of how to make a good impression on people to whom they had no civic or family ties. The historian Roland Marchand writes, "The reasons why one man gained a promotion or one woman suffered a social snub had become less based on grounds of long-standing favoritism or old family fights. In the increasingly anonymous business and social relationship of the age, one might suspect that anything, including a first impression, made the crucial difference. Americans responded to these pressures by trying to become salesmen who could sell not only their company's latest gizmo, but also themselves. Americans also received advice on self-presentation, whether they liked it or not, from the advertising industry. While early print ads were straightforward product announcements, Eaton's Highland Linen, the freshest and cleanest writing paper. The new personality-driven ads cast customers as performers with stage fright, from which only the advertiser's product might rescue them. These ads focused obsessively on the hostile glare of the public spotlight. All around you, people are judging you silently. Warn a 1922 ad for Woodbury soap. Critical eyes are sizing you up right now, advised the Williams Shaving Cream Company. Child guidance experts of the 1920s set about helping children to develop winning personalities. Until then, these professionals had worried mainly about sexually precocious girls and criminal boys. But now psychologists, social workers, and doctors focused on the everyday child with a maladjusted personality, particularly shy children. Shyness could lead to dire outcomes, they warned, from alcoholism to suicide, while an outgoing personality would bring social and final success. By 1950, the slogan of the mid-century White House Conference on Children and Youth was anxiety disorder, which essentially means pathological shyness, now thought to afflict nearly 1 in 5 of us. The most recent version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the Psychiatrist's Bible of Mental Disorders, considers the fear of public speaking to be a pathology, not an annoyance, not a disadvantage, but a disease. One senior manager at Kodak said, "It's not enough to be able to sit at your computer, excited about a fantastic regression analysis, if you're sensitive about presenting those results to an executive group. Apparently it's okay to be sensitive about doing a regression analysis, as long as you're excited about giving speeches." So how did we go from character to personality, without realizing that we had sacrificed something meaningful along the way? Are introverts better leaders than extroverts? Or is it the other way around? If you don't know what introverts or extroverts are, click here. In order to answer that question, I would like to introduce you to Don. Don is a Chinese-American student at Harvard Business School, HBS, also known as the spiritual capital of extroverts. Don is a bitter introvert, as he cheerfully puts it. Bitter because the more time he spends at the Harvard Business School, the more convinced he becomes that he better change his ways. A lot of the classes at HBS includes discussions, especially between students. Half of the students' grade and a much larger percentage of their social status are based on whether they throw themselves into these discussions. If a student talks often and forcefully, he's a player. If he doesn't, he's on the margins. Many of the students adapt easily to this system, but not Don. He has trouble elbowing his way into class discussions. In some classes he barely speaks at all. He prefers to contribute, only when he believes he has something insightful to add, or honest to God disagrees with someone. By the time Don falls into bed at night, he's exhausted. And sometimes he wonders why exactly he should have to work so hard at being outgoing. Don recently worked a summer job in China. He was struck how different the social norms were, and how much more comfortable he felt. In China there was more emphasis on listening, on asking questions, rather than holding forth, on putting others' need first. In the United States, he feels conversation is about how effective you are at turning your experiences into stories, whereas a Chinese person might be concerned with taking up too much of the other person's time with unnecessary information. Now I know what you're thinking. Daniel, this Don guy, he seems like a nice guy and all that, but what does this have to do with leadership? Don't worry, I'm soon there. The essence of the Harvard Business School education is that leaders have to act confidently and make decisions in the face of incomplete information. But even at Harvard, there are signs that something might be wrong with the leadership styles that value quick and confident answers, or quiet and slow decision making. Every autumn, Harvard has a role-playing class called the Subarctic Survival Situation. The students are told that they have just crash-landed a plane in the subarctic region in Canada. The students are divided into small groups and asked to imagine that their group has brought with them 15 items from the plane: compass, sleeping bag, axe, and so on. Then they are told to rank them in order of importance to the group's survival. First, the students rank the items individually, then they do so as a team. Next, they score those ranking against an expert to see how well they did. The point of the exercise is to teach group synergy. Successful synergy means a higher ranking for the team than for its individual members. The group fails when any of its members has a better ranking than the overall team. And failure is exactly what can happen when students prize self-confidence too highly. One of Don's classmates was in a group lucky to include a young man with extensive experience in the subarctic woods. He had a lot of good ideas about how to rank the 15 items, but his group didn't listen because he expressed his views too quietly. Our action plan was based on what the most vocal people suggested, recalls the classmate. When the less vocal people put out ideas, those ideas were rejected. The ideas that were rejected would have kept us alive and out of trouble, but they were dismissed because of the persuasion with which the most vocal people suggested their ideas. This might sound like a harmless game, but if you think of meetings you have attended, you can probably recall a time, plenty of times, when the opinion of the most dynamic or talkative person won to the damage of everyone else. If we assume that quiet and loud people have roughly the same number of good and bad ideas, then we should worry if the louder and more forceful people always carry the day. This would mean that an awful lot of bad ideas prevail while good ones get ignored. We also see talkers as leaders. The more a person talks, the more other group members direct their attention to him, which means they become increasingly powerful as the meeting goes on. All of this would be fine if more talking were correlated with greater insight, but research actually suggests that there is no such link. So, which one is a better leader? an introvert or an extrovert? One answer comes from the Professor Adam Grant, who has spent a lot of time consulting with the top leaders of the world, everything from Google to the US Army. Grant had a theory about which kinds of circumstances would call for introverted leadership. His assumption was that extroverted leaders improve group performance when the employees are passive, but that introverted leaders are more effective with proactive employees. He did many experiments to test his theory, and one of them was the t-shirt folding experiment. Grant divided 163 college students into competing teams and told them to fold as many t-shirts as possible in 10 minutes. What the participants didn't know was that each team included 2 actors. In some teams, the 2 actors acted passively, following the leader's instructions. In other teams, one of the actors said, "I wonder if there's a more efficient way to do this." The other actor replied they had a friend from Japan who had a faster way to fold the shirts. "It might take a minute or 2 to teach you," the actor told the leader, "but do we want to try it?" The results were striking. The introverted leaders were 20% more likely to follow the suggestion, and the teams had 24% better results than the teams of the extroverted leaders. When the followers were not proactive though, the teams led by extroverts outperformed those led by introverts by 22%. So why did these leaders' effectiveness turn on whether their employees were passive or proactive? Grant says it makes sense that introverts are uniquely good at leading proactive employees. Because of their tendency to listen to others and lack of interest in dominating social situations, introverts are more likely to hear and implement suggestions. Having benefited from the talents of their followers, they are then likely to motivate them to be even more proactive. Introverted leaders create a powerful circle of proactivity. In other words, in the t-shirt folding study, the team members reported perceiving the introverted leaders as more open and receptive to their ideas, which motivate them to work even harder and fold more shirts. Extroverts, on the other hand, can be so intent on putting their own stamp on events that they risk of losing others' good ideas along the way and making them more passive. Professor Francesca Gino of Harvard Business School says, "Often the leaders end up doing a lot of the talking and not listening to any of the ideas that the followers are trying to provide. But with their natural ability to inspire, extroverted leaders are better at getting results from more passive workers." So what have we learned? We don't need giant personalities to transform companies or societies. We need leaders who build not their own egos, but the institutions they run.